For years, we thought New Covenant life was just a list of Christian do's and don'ts. But what if it's not? What if it is an ongoing miracle of freedom and transformation that Jesus wants to do for you, in you, and through you? Join us as we answer questions about the miracle and mystery of New Covenant grace. This is GraceLife.
I am here with my good friend Glenn Adams, who is helping me get this thing kicked off for our first episode of This is GraceLife. And obviously what we're going to be trying to do here over the next several weeks is to bring some understanding to this often used word grace and try to incorporate that better into our everyday life. So Glenn's going to help me by giving me some questions that we end up getting asked all over the world, and that will help us set the groundwork for where we want to go in this.
Mark, I think it's important, if it's okay, can you share just a little bit about how long you've been in ministry, what your ministry is about real quick? I'm sure there's a lot of new listeners that might have come across your ministry and this podcast, and do you want to take just a quick second before we start answering questions to just kind of explain your ministry and what all you've been doing for all these years?
Yeah, sounds great. Linda and I were little hippie kids that came to Jesus back in the late 60s, and almost immediately we were ministering to kids like us, a lot of street kids. And some of you saw the movie Jesus Revolution. You saw many of the places that we ministered in the big tent that Chuck Smith had out in California. And as the years went by, the coffee houses, what we called them back in those days, most of them were all painted black inside with neon posters about Jesus, all that. Those turned into churches and ended up pastoring what would be more normal church situations, but experienced some real success from 1974, 1975 up to 1992. We experienced what anybody would consider to be church success and overseas ministry and that sort of thing. But in the process of that, we probably overuse this phrase, I got burned out badly. What burned me out was the growing belief that God was the most happy with me when I was working really, really hard, because that showed that I was serious. And beginning to measure success the way we tend to measure it in the world, more people, more money, more experiences. And I had a tragic situation that happened in 1992. It really hurt. And I felt that somehow I was responsible for a friend of mine who messed up his life. And so we stepped away from ministry for the first time ever. And we moved from Chicago to St. Louis because I had built a business with offices around the country along with pastoring. That was part of my ambitious drive to make Jesus happy, to do more all the time. And when we moved down here, a serious depression set in. And for the next 5 years, I got deeper and deeper and deeper in depression. 1996, I didn't attend a single church meeting because I was just so burned out and felt like I was such a failure. It's interesting because in the midst of all that depression, I never one time thought I was going to hell when I died. I never doubted what we call salvation. What I doubted was that God was happy with me. I just really didn't feel that I was doing enough anymore because I wasn't doing much of anything, which would naturally give me that feeling. But I had an amazing experience. A lot of people have read about it in my books or heard about it from listening to me. But in short, I had an encounter with the Lord that radically changed the way I viewed this little 5-letter word, grace. And I thought I knew all about grace. I had preached and taught about grace for all those years. But in that process, I began to realize that I had really misunderstood what grace meant. And I seriously misunderstood what grace meant in the Old Testament, and did it mean the same thing in the New Testament. So as a response to that dramatic experience that I had. Linda and I and Amanda, she was 12 at the time. Other kids were grown and married. We gave up everything we had. We started traveling the world, teaching what I felt like I was seeing. And that just grew and grew and grew and grew. And now we're located in St. Louis permanently, and I don't travel anymore, out of the country anyway. I can't because of health reasons. But men and women that we've trained over the past 28, 29 years now are carrying on this message to countries around the world. And my books have been published in well over 20 languages, and now we're giving away tens of thousands of books every year in these foreign countries.
And for the people that are new to, because I think people struggle once they're new with Christianity and different things, they hear the word grace, and then they think, for the new Christians, a lot of people think it's typically a get out of jail free card, but we know that's not. And then so like one of the first questions that you've gotten is, what is the difference between grace in the Old Testament versus grace in the New Testament?
Yeah, I get asked this from all over the world, and it's a very important question, great question. In the Old Testament, and I'm not going to get into the Hebrew and all that sort of thing, but in the Old Testament, the word mercy and grace essentially mean the same thing. So the word grace in our English translations appears well over 200 times, and in every case, it means essentially the same thing as mercy. It unearned love, unearned favor, the unearned goodness of God. We don't deserve anything, but God is so good, He pours out His goodness in our lives. And by the way, let me say right now, we never outgrow the mercy of God. We never outgrow the need for the ongoing revelation that we don't deserve anything. But this great God, out of His goodness, pours out constantly in our lives. But when we come to the New Testament, something very dramatically changes. Now, the word grace appears in Acts and the epistles a little over 100 times. Of course, obviously, much shorter wording in the New Testament. However, the first apostles appropriated a Greek word, charis, and we know that from charismatic and those kinds of words, and charisma. But they appropriated this Greek word to describe what was the new birth, or what was the new covenant. And this word literally means the divine influence on the heart and its reflection outward. From that, many of us have come up with this concept that we now find throughout all of church history, that salvation in the new covenant means that Christ has come to live in us and wants to live through us. So the difference is that mercy and grace in the old covenant meant essentially the same thing. In the new covenant, they mean very different things. Mercy still appears repeatedly, and we never outgrow that. But we're talking here about the unearned love of God. Because of His great mercy, as Paul said, because of His great mercy, He has saved us by His grace. Because He loved us when we were unlovable, when we believed that about Him, He now saves us by His grace. Paul says we have been raised from spiritual death by the grace of God. Well, to be raised from the dead requires more than just, well, you're unlovely, but I love you. It requires a miracle. So there's a miracle of grace that happens at our new birth. Our spirits are dead, according to the New Covenant, New Testament. We're made alive to God, but that's by the miracle of this power. And grace is a power. I know, a lot of my friends and teachers who do what I do tend to refer to, well, grace is Jesus. Well, that's true, but the miraculous power of grace is something that Jesus brings when we receive Him. He comes into our life, and this in our life thing is absolutely critical, because the new covenant is not just a matter of, well, we're forgiven. The old covenant had forgiveness for anybody who wanted it. But in the new covenant, the miracle that happens there is that God, by His Spirit, Jesus comes to live in and through us.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say when you mention your colleagues and different people that you've ministered with and different teachers that you know, when they talk about grace as Jesus, that's true. However, I think it's fair to say that, God had grace even all the way back in the Garden of Eden.
Sure.
And so I think that's a big thing for people to understand, is that you see all through the Old Testament God's grace and mercy throughout, even before Jesus, and then we understand. But why, you mentioned this word new covenant grace a few times. Why do we call it new covenant grace?
Yeah, well, that's very important, because the understanding of the old covenant is, and when we read through the Old Testament, we see this all the time. God's presence would come to the people, do something, and then God's presence would depart. The best illustration of that is on the Old Testament tabernacle, where God would literally come as a cloud, and the people could see it, and then they would offer their sacrifice, and then God's presence would leave. But when Jesus comes, he says, when I leave, I'm going to send the Holy Spirit, and he will live in you. He has been with you in the Old Covenant, but he's going to be in you. And by being in you, I promise you that he will never leave you or forsake you unto the ends of the age, forever. So here's the difference. In the new covenant, Jesus, by his Spirit, comes to live in us. Paul writes over and over again, it is Christ in us, the hope of glory. It is Christ in us that teaches us and enables us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions in this current age. So the difference is important, and that difference is that when David prayed in Psalm 51 after he sinned with Bathsheba and had her husband murdered, his prayer was, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. David understood that the Spirit of God in the Old Covenant came and went. He was with you when you needed him, and then he departed. But in the departing, there was a sense that God's not here anymore for a while. But in the new covenant, he comes to live in us. There is never a moment, when a person has been born again, there is never a moment that they are, though we hear this phrase often, far from God. That's not, how can I be, I can't be far from a heart because it's inside me. I can't be far from a stomach because it's inside me. I can't be far from Jesus because he comes to live in me. He does not come and go. New covenant grace is the permanent residence of Christ at our new birth, coming to live inside of us. Now, obviously, somebody would ask the question, well, but I don't feel his presence all the time. Well, I would seriously suggest that the more we grow our awareness of what the truth of grace really is, the more we sense the presence of the Lord in us and with us all the time. Is that possible? Yes, it is. And Paul refers to it again and again. So our problem isn't that the Spirit of God, the presence of God, the grace of God comes and goes. The problem is we've just had bad teaching, and we see too much out of the old covenant. And what we need to do is, well, Romans 12:1, so then renew your minds and be transformed by it. We need our minds renewed to the reality. Our awareness has to grow.
Yeah, and I think it's really the problem, and you've been in ministry a lot longer than me, so you can tell me if I'm incorrect here, but from my point of view as a person that's been doing this not nearly as long as you, but I've noticed that either you have Christians that at one point have focused too much on the Old Testament, the old law, or it's swung in a whole different direction of we get this, well, we're saved by grace, so we can do what we want. But I feel like from what you're saying, talking about, this is GraceLife, talking about the difference between the Old and the New Testament, and you're really hammering some really good stuff here and focusing on the new covenant of grace. I think you're trying to show us that there is this good balance that we need to seek with grace and with God.
I've been saved by grace now, and I can do whatever I want. means that I don't understand grace.
Right.
I mean, that would be like saying, okay, I've gone to the doctor, he's given me the medicine, and now it's okay for me to stay sick. No, the medicine, if you just simply take it, is what will make you better. So when I come to Jesus and I'm born again, he comes to live inside of me, brings the power of his grace inside of me. Now it's a matter of, how do I grow in that grace? How do I grow in it? And the resulting ability, according to Titus 2:11, so then the grace of God has appeared to all men, teaching us how to say no to sin. The reality then is that if I truly understand grace, I see it as both the full acceptance of God of me. He has fully accepted me because of Jesus. But also, he is now empowering me to say no to the very sins that I used to give into. And that is a progression that we walk in. And one of these episodes, no doubt, will talk about the fallacy of perfection in the Christian life. And the apostles never, ever expected themselves or anybody else to be perfect. That's not the issue. The issue is that grace begins with the miracle of the new birth. Christ comes into us. And see, that is not, you know what, I'm gonna now live for Jesus, so I'm gonna learn all the Christian things I'm supposed to do, and I'm gonna grit my teeth, and I'm gonna start doing them. That is not biblical Christianity. Biblical Christianity is, I'm dead to God, but I want to be made alive. He comes to live in me, and suddenly I have a new heart. I have a new spirit living in me. Consequently, I begin to have new desires. Now, my job is not to try to keep a list of Christians' do's or don'ts, but my job is to feed my mind, which is the same mind I had before I was born again, to feed my mind so that I'm becoming more and more aware of what grace wants to do inside of me. And of course, Jesus set it all up by helping us understand that true miraculous change happens from the inside out. The Pharisees contradicted that with, no. If you keep the law, if you do the right things outwardly, then the inward will change. It's impossible. It just doesn't work, which is why I frequently tell people you cannot join Christianity. You can join Judaism. I could become a Jew if I learned the rules and did them. You could join Islam. You can learn the rules, and you can become a Buddhist and learn the sevenfold path to nirvana. But you can't join Christianity. Why? Because it requires a miracle. And when the miracle begins at the new birth, then the mystery begins to unfold.
Yeah, and that's going to one of our last question is, why do I refer to the miracle and mystery of New Covenant grace? Yeah,
excellent. The reality is that the miracle of grace begins at the miracle of the new birth. And again, the new birth is not, well, I've changed my mind and now I'm going to think Christian. That's not it. The miracle of the new birth is I surrender ownership of my life and Jesus comes to live in me. And it's a miracle. I mean, it is, Peter said, you've been born of God born again by the incorruptible seed that has come into you and birthed new life. This is a miracle. Now it begins to grow. Think about this. We have the Bible. Many of us have several Bibles and several translations, and most of them gather dust. We'll just be honest about that. The New Testament Christians had none of that. The four Gospels weren't done until about 30 years after Jesus went back to the Father. Well, they didn't have the Gospels of Christ. They couldn't read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. It didn't exist. The book of Acts didn't exist until probably 30 years after Jesus. The epistles were being written one at a time. These people had nothing written. By the way, it wouldn't have helped them. 95% of the Roman Empire could not read.
So they were reliant on other people to
exactly.
to
they
tell
relied
them.
on the apostles to tell them the truth. And that truth resonated with the Spirit of God who had come to live inside of them. I mean, think about it. They had absolutely no helps or tools except each other and the Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead living inside them. See, I mean, I say that and then I think, what the heck? These people had nothing except the Spirit of God living inside of them. And I've got that, but I've got all these other things too. Could I be relying on these other things more than I should? And I think there's a important...
That's part of our problem in modern day Christianity and just society in itself. Whenever, and you know how it is, you've ministered in other countries and you've seen miracles and healings and lots of different things, and a lot of that is purely on the faith and them not relying on anything else.
They have no other place to go.
That's all they have.
No,
and so that's also too, like, ties in. You talked about, it's the new covenant grace is miraculous, but you also, what's the mystery about? You talk about it being mysterious.
Yeah. This word mystery is an amazing word. And it took me a few years to really become aware of the fact that Paul used the word mystery over and over again in his letters. He constantly referred to the mystery of Christ, the mystery of grace, or more frequently, the mystery of the gospel. In fact, he closes the entire letter of Romans, which is the longest letter that we have a record of it, and it is the most, if you had nothing else but the letter to the Romans, you could live a very successful Christian life. At the very end, this is how he closes. And so then, I just want to remind you of the mystery which God has kept hidden from ages past, but is now made known to all the saints. Goodbye. And he ends the cotton-picking letter. And I read that over and over and over again. I said, wait a minute. He does not explain the mystery. And I racked my brain saying, Lord, how could he do that? How could he say this is the most important thing and God planned it from before the beginning and all the prophets prophesied about it, but they didn't understand it. But now we have come to understand it and he's made it known to us, and not explain the mystery. If you keep on reading through the letters, you'll find that he refers to it again and again and again. And you have to get all the way down to Colossians 1 before Paul simply tells us what the mystery is. And he says, and this is the great mystery that was kept hidden, almost exactly word for word from Romans, which is the mystery, which is Christ in you. That concept of Christ literally, and that's the thing I think we have to ask the Lord to help us to wrap our understanding around. These people believed that this was a literal fact, that Christ, by the Spirit, was literally living. Paul went so far as to say, God's temple used to be that building in Jerusalem, but now God's temple is you.
And all these years later, it's probably easier for us to kind of not grasp it or really comprehend it, but kind of believe in it more than them when they weren't very far removed from Jesus actually dying, where he was like, wait a minute, he was our teacher and he was he was our Messiah. Not that far ago,
absolutely.
Not that long ago, but now, wait a minute, he lives in me now? And that's really, that. So I can see where that really, that it's mysterious now, but I can definitely see how mysterious it was to the early church.
Yeah, and imagine they had nothing to read to reinforce this. That they had to have the miracle of the new birth by the power of grace to then begin to comprehend, oh my gosh, something is going on inside of me that I have never felt or never known or never experienced before. My likes and dislikes are changing. I don't understand this. And then Paul would come along and say, look, what you're experiencing is the reality that Christ by his Spirit is living in you. This is a mystery. Well, of course it's a mystery. How can God live inside of, what in its basic element is a walking, talking pile of dirt? That's what our physical bodies were made out of. And when we die, that's what our bodies are going to return to, whether you get buried or not. It's just going to be dirt. But how can God live in? It's a mystery. So, well, Mark, explain to me how this works. I can't. It's a mystery. But Paul refers to it 11 times in his letters. In fact, he even says on 2 different occasions, he says, pray for me that I may be able to articulate the mystery in the way that I should. It will always be a mystery to us until Jesus returns and makes all of this clear. But the more we set our hope on the fact that there is a mysterious transformation that is going on inside of us, the more we would begin to see Jesus living through us. And of course, this is what the fruit of the Spirit is all about. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. Those fruits of the Spirit actually describe the character and nature of Jesus. He's living in us, and he wants to live through us. And our hope is, Glenn, that in these podcasts, that we'll be able to help people move away from that just being a metaphor. Yes, Christ lives in my heart by faith. Yeah, No. This is not a metaphor. Those first believers literally believed this was true. That's what caused them to be called Christians. The first Jewish converts were never called Christians. It wasn't until the gospel got to Antioch in Syria, to Gentiles who knew nothing about the Old Testament. They didn't know Moses, Abraham. They didn't know any of that stuff. But they heard the message of Jesus as the God of creation who came and died to pay for their sins, but now rose so he can live in them. They believe that, and without anything written, they begin to change. And people begin to say, you act more and more like the stories we've heard about that guy you believe in. And it was the world that called Gentile believers Christians. Well, the power of grace was working in them and growing in them, and as a result, people were seeing Jesus flowing through their lives in the fruits of the Spirit.
How do you think people's lives today in 2025 will change? Christians, that people that are Christians, if they can understand GraceLife, if they can understand, if they can understand that we can't understand the mystery of it, but if we start understanding the miracle of it, and that if we really start focusing on Jesus living in us, how do you think that will change a Christian's perspective and their life and their walk with God in general?
Yeah, man. Is there a more important question than that? No. I can tell you for me, I can tell you the first thing that happened in a matter of weeks was my fear of God being my judge was completely washed away. I began to see him as my father who loved me, who accepted me exactly as I am right now, knowing that one day I would be completed in the image of his son. But he wasn't waiting till then to love me. He was loving me unconditionally now. That's the first thing that happened, because the miracle that begins with grace is the message begins to bombard our hearts and our minds that God loves us with an unconditional love. And he's accepting us as we are, where we are right now. Now, the mystery is he's not going to leave us as we are, but he, from the inside out, not the outside in, not by rules and regulations. That's the law. And that all depends on human effort. But we're talking about a miracle of Christ's life, Christ's ability to be loving, joyful, peaceful, kind, his ability living inside of us. So I would say, to close this up here, God help us that this is no longer a metaphor. Yes, Jesus lives in us. That's a wonderful thing. We believe that. No. These people were not looking at this as a metaphor. Paul's language makes it extremely clear. In fact, when he wrote to the Corinthians about their carnality, first of all, he never said, now you're lost because you're sinning. He didn't say that at all. He just said, you're saints of God. And you're still continuing in some things that are making your life rotten, isn't it? I know you don't want to stay that way. But his response to them was 3 times in the 2 letters to the Corinthians, you have forgotten who lives in you. That's my challenge, is I am not as aware of Christ living in me, not nearly aware as I need to be. So my goal now is to keep increasing my awareness. Jesus is living in me. And I am expecting. So, number 1, this overwhelming sense of complete acceptance by God because of Jesus, not because of anything I've done. That's a wonderful thing to say and a wonderful thing to know. Number 2, a growing reality that the character of Jesus, the nature of Jesus, which is living in me, wants to begin to flow out of me. And I do remember the day, a few months after all of this began to happen in me, when my own wife said, Mark, you're not nearly as angry as you were a few months ago. Brother, because anger had been, in my fear of God, my unhealthy fear of God, anger had really grown in me. But when Linda said that, I was able to look at this and say, I have put forth no effort to stop being angry, but I have been drawing near to Jesus. And somebody else has seen a change in my character, in my nature, and that's what Grace wants to produce. So this new journey for us in this podcast, this is going to be fun. This is really going to be fun.
I'm excited.
Because GraceLife is what takes all the pressure off. It's what takes all the weights off of, well, I didn't do enough of this, I didn't do enough of that. All of that gets washed away. When we realize that Paul knew what he was talking about in Philippians 1:6, where he said, for I am confident in this one thing, that he who began this good work in you, he will complete it until the day of Christ's appearing.
Amen.
GraceLife is what you were created to experience. For books, audios, videos, and lots of free stuff, join us at markdrake.org. This is GraceLife.